1949 KF 9. Post-war, it really didn't come out until quite a while later. He originally had an engine design that was like the KG7 with two power heads welded together at opposites, so it was basically a horizontally opposed four, and that never came to be. They had advertising for it, looked like it, but it never was. This was the engine that they actually produced. It was sold 1949 through 50. I don't know if this ditch didn't sell that well or whatever. This was the engine that the famous guy running up the river in Oregon, that's what he's using as one of these KF9s. They got a lot of low-end grunt, and they swung a really large propeller. It's right here. They had 3 or 4 different sizes for it. This one's an 11.5 by 9.5 diameter, and it does a nice job with it. The mechanics that worked in these things called it the plumber's nightmare, and as you can see, it's probably an appropriate name for it. It's got a lot of tubing. It's got a fuel pump rather than a primer bulb, so you use that to prime it up, and then there's a fuel pressure gauge in there that you can see, and the connection fitting is a very odd number. It's still available today. The company that made it still makes it. It wasn't a Mercury connector. I don't know what they used it in industry. Probably sold it on World War II stuff. It's complex and it ain't cheap. You can see it here. There's the plunger that works it, and then it's got a valve in there that's pushed out by this brass piece right here. It works well. It does not really pump enough fuel. It's got an AC, a very small AC mechanical pump which works off a cam. This is a gear train in here, and it's got a gear-driven cam as well that operates this mechanical fuel pump. They use that same rig in the KGs too. This has a Fairbanks Morse mag, and it requires removal of the power head to get it out of there. As you can well see, there's not really anything that comes off easy. And then what you won't see on many of them is a handle right here which operates the throttle. I've got a crash throttle on it too. This handle's almost impossible to use. It has a huge spring in it. It's really, really hard to keep it closed. You'd lose the blood circulation in your hand using it. So usually they would cut off, and you find them cut off, usually right in front of this piece right here. It won quite a few races in '49. It was entered the first year, I think 47 or 48. There was one guy that had a Mercury KF7 or KE7. I think it was the first series of the hot engines, and he was the only guy in it. He won his class, which was B, and he beat most of C and quite a few of D. And the next year, better than 50% of the engines in that New York Marathon, which was the premier race at the time, were Mercuries. And this was the next one. This one kind of wiped out the D class, and I think Bill beat most of the E's too, which were the big quad Evinrude quads. And I suspect very strongly that the guys that won, I forget their name, they were based in Ohio as a father and son team. I suspect they ported this engine because the KG walks off and leaves this thing behind. It's got a lot of low end grunt, but it doesn't have a lot of top end. I mean, it would have been amazing for its day and age. It produces 25 horsepower, probably at about 4,000. It produces a lot, and there's not much else about it. It's 122 pounds. It has no gear shift, and the water pump is like the smaller ones. It's down here, it's in here, and it pumps plenty of water, but it's in forward gear. Probably by today's standards, this thing would inspire a lot of lawsuits. You got some nice sharp edges up here. You could fall against that. You have to, like the Evinrude 50 at the time, which was a monster, you had to start it facing the rear, and it was in gear, and you were standing up to pull this thing over, and the Evinrude. So you had lots of opportunity for things to go wrong. But it does run nicely. There's another feature on this engine that's kind of unusual, is these are Allen, 12-point nuts, and you have to use a 6-point Allen wrench in order to tighten them, and they are weird, but that's standard. That was stock on this engine. The clamp brackets were changed to these are cast ones, and in the course of racing, a lot of them broke, and they ended up on the KGs having forged clamp brackets, very much like the KG7. The gas tank in this, if you bought a Mercury gas tank, was this baby right here. It's got a gauge it's actually got a magnetic sensor in it. It's got a magnet that swings underneath the gauge itself to activate it. And it's rather a large capacity. I think it's 10 maybe gallons. I've never measured it. And this tank was also used for marathons. And in marathon running, if they were using a KG7, which did not have a fuel pump, in place of this top, they'd put a air pump. In other words, you pressurize the tank, which was sealed, and force gas into the engine and into the tank on top of the engine, and they had a special one-way valve for that, which I have some of on my KGs. I don't really understand how they work, but they do. And let's see, I guess that's it. The steering was rear steering. It had to be hooked up in the back. Some of the guys, when they were doing gas tanks, a lot of those older ones, you'll see pictures of them. They used 5-gallon motor oil, reclaimed motor oil. A lot of the cars burned a lot of oil, and you could buy these large 5-gallon cans, pails of oil. And this one happens to be a Sunoco Mercury motor oil. And they'd take the top and put a pickup in it with a fitting and use them for a gas tank instead of Mercury's rather expensive gas tank. The cover on these KF9s is screwed on. It has 1, 2, 3, 4 Phillips head screws and a choke that you've got to undo, and then you bang it off with your hands, the heel of your hand, and the same way going on. It's kind of a miserable process. The spark plugs are underneath this back cover, and there are 2 screws that hold it on as well, right here and right here, and then you've got your spark plugs exposed.
Posty says, this is the end of the show.
That's all.
Goodbye.
Folks.